You and I had talked a little bit about risk, and you even just mentioned it a minute or two ago. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I think we're security professionals now. We've been kind of in this market that is risen for the past decade, which is unprecedented. And then all of a sudden now we've got the bubble's been burst a bit with the corona. I'm thinking that risk is now going to be first and foremost, and I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, here's a wild thing. Let me see. I wrote not to always push my books, but I consider out of the 12 books I have, there's one called Data-Driven Defense, Data-Driven Computer Defense, came out a couple of years ago. That's my magnum opus. The other books don't matter near as much as that one. And if someone says, well, Roger, which of your books should I read? That one, because the lessons that it teaches in there about how to do better risk-based security underlies everything else. And the vast majority of companies do not do their risk right. They're absolutely horrible at it. In that, so social engineering is responsible for 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches today. Unpatched software about 20 to 40%. And then you have some, they overlap each other. Everything else you can think of, password hacking, insider threat, whatever, only accounts for about 1 to 10% of the risk in most organizations. Like, okay, if you can think of how somebody's been compromised, that you've even read in the paper on your own devices and computers at home, it was probably social engineering or unpatched software. And yet the average company doesn't devote 5% of their resources to fixing those things. And they actually aren't fixed. They're never fixed. And they have been the number one, number two. They change positions sometimes, but they've been the number one, number two ways to break into somebody's network or device for all 30 years I've been in computers. It's not a surprise. Yeah, you have all these people, I got to get the latest endpoint detection. I need to get the best intrusion detection. I need to get this thing and that thing. But they're not concentrating on just doing, it's not a surprise. I feel like I'm Warren Buffett telling people to buy low and sell high, and then you just can't get people to do that. I'm literally saying you should patch your software and not get tricked into doing something bad. And that's it. And people don't do it. And they're like, we got hacked again. How was it? Oh, you have social engineering, unpatched software. And then they go out and they buy a $100,000 appliance device that does some fancy, future detection thing that they've been sold, but they're not making patching better. And they're not working harder to stop. They're like, we're trying to stop social engineering. I'm like, well, are you really effectively, aggressively? Because it's your number one threat. No company I've ever met has treated it like the number one threat, or they're like, well, we're worried about ransomware. Ransomware is an outcome of you not being patched or being socially engineered. Ransomware is not your problem. That is an outcome of a problem. And people don't focus enough on the root exploit entry points. There's 10 of them, there's only 10 ways that hackers and malware break into your environment. And it's like every computer company is like, my house is broken into again. My house is broken into again. My house is broken into again. And you're like, well, how are they broken in? They're like, I don't know. The thief got in the bedroom. Thief got in the bedroom. Thief got in the bedroom. But if you don't know, is it through the door or the window? Or maybe they learn. Let me tell you how bad it is. They learn that the thief is coming through the window. Every time they've broken in and it's been through a window, I'm going to go out and buy a door with more locks. That literally is how bad we have this entire industry that seems like it's matured with the most immature risk model I've ever seen in my life. We were told computer security is about risk management, but there's almost no consideration of risk in most of the decisions at all. Someone reads from a book and goes, oh, this threat, let's say Meltdown Inspector. Meltdown Inspector, that's the most highest risk exploits, impacts all CPU chips made since the 1990s. And if you don't patch it, you're at high risk. And if you run a software vulnerability report, software patch vulnerability report, it's going to say Meltdown Inspector, critical risk, patch them now. There has never been, as far as I know, a successful public used Meltdown or Inspector exploit against any company in the entire global world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think people have a problem with the Microsoft patches, but I think they have a lot of problems with the third-party apps. I think the third-party applications, especially the ones that introduce system instability, so it almost becomes like an availability problem as much as a patching problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly, but let me say this again, only 2%, if you look at the data, only 2% of exploits that are announced. So last year we had 12,174 things you're supposed to patch. Year before that, it was almost 15,000. Year before that, it was almost 17,000. So 12,000, great, we should celebrate. Less than 2% of those were ever actually used ever in the field. But most people don't know that. And so they're trying to patch it all. And so if you have a patch management program, they got 5,000 things they want to patch. When the reality is, if you focus better at 100% patching of the 10 most likely things to be patched, you'd be far better off.